Why Excel pivot table? Then, if you need to get some insights from your data or need to create a report really fast, then you are going to need pivot table in Excel. For example, if you receive the dataset like that and you need to create a report that shows what categories generates more revenue for you, then you will need pivot table. Also, if you would like to check what store generate more revenue or what's the percentage of each store from the sales, also you will need pivot table. So let's stop wasting our time and jump into work. Before we start, and as usual, let me tell you that the file we will be using in this video is linked below in the description. You can download it and follow along with me step by step. So let's have a deep look and fast look on the table we will work on for today's video. It's a very simple table that contains some invoices numbers, invoice date, customer ID, store, seller ID, product code and category, price per unit, quantity and total amount. If you have a dataset like that and you would like to get some insights from it, absolutely, then you will need to use pivot table in Excel. But there is some conditions you need to make sure that it's already existing in the data that will be used in creating the pivot table. The first thing is a table format. So you need to make sure that all your data has headers and there is no any empty column in between. The second thing is you need to make sure that there is no total and subtotals in between your data. Last but not least, that your data is consistent. For example, you need to make sure that this column is including only the invoice date and there is no any customer ID or a store embedded into this column. And then we can start. If you need to create a pivot table from your data, all you need to do is to click inside your data and then go to Insert menu and click Pivot Table. For this window displayed here, it's including the table or range, and if you can see carefully, it's including the data which is the sheet name or worksheet name beside the range that will be used in the pivot table. And as you can see, it's a fixed range. What does it mean? That means that if you added any new entry or any new record inside your data, it will not be included unless you refresh or resize the pivot table source. But here is a question, how we can come over that? Honestly, I prefer to convert the data you are using or the range to be a table, and you can do that from the Insert menu and then click on Table, or from your keyboard you can press Ctrl T. Then you will create a table from that. What the benefits behind that, if you created or changed the range into a table, then you will be assured that any new record will be considered, because as you can see here, there is a table name. If we rename that as dataset and press OK, then this range is named as dataset table. If we now go for Insert and click on the pivot table, then we will have the range dataset. It doesn't matter what is the last row in it, it will for sure included in the pivot table when you created it. But let's try another approach here. What if we try to press on or click on the recommended pivot tables? Then you will have some of suggestions or recommended pivot table based on your data. And let's have a look on it. For example, this one is showing the seller ID and the price per unit for each one. Let's scroll down there and let's try something like that. If we clicked on that, we will have the seller ID and the total amount sold by each salesperson. So if we clicked on OK, now we will have this new pivot table in our new worksheet that created by pivot table. And if you would like to create at the same page, you will need to click on the pivot table and then choose existing worksheet. Then you can select the place you would like to add the pivot table in. Let's get back to our pivot table we already created. We can see on the right place here that we have this list of table fields or table headers. That's why I was asking you to check there is no any empty columns in between your data. Also, you need to check that all data has headers because it will appear here like that. And for this recommended pivot table, we can see that the seller ID is added into rows, and also the total amount is added for values. And to be aware of that, that amounts has only numbers. So for example, if you drag this category and add it to the values, it will be added as account, and any text field that added into this will be added as account. Also, you can drag the seller ID from the rows into columns to be in a horizontal structure instead of being vertical. Let's get it back to the rows section. Then this pivot table fields can also be formatted. For example, if you clicked on this gear, you will have this drop down list. You can check what format you need to view your pivot table fields. For example, it's now selected as field section and area section stacked. But if we clicked on this option, which is field section and area section side by side, it will change the view for you in order to have a better view for your pivot table fields. And also, this area you can drag anything from and to it. For our example here, if we need to add the store into the columns in order to have a full view for the store's location and the seller, you can realize that now you have a better view for this store location and the seller ID. Or you can move this store into the filter area in order to have it as a filter, and then you can filter what you need. For example, if you need to check the New York store, you will select it and press OK. Then everything will change for you in order to read only the New York store. Or if you need to select multiple items, you need to activate this option here, and then you will just check the stores you need. Also, for any reason, by default, or most of the time, if you added any amount or any number into the values section, it will be treated as sum. It will sum and summarize your data as sum. But for any reason, you need to change that, for example, into average. All you need to do is to click here on this small arrow and then choose value field setting. And then from sum, you can change it into count, average, maximum, minimum, and many other options. For example, let's have it an average. You will see that it is changed immediately into average and everything in the pivot table changed. Let's get it back as sum. You can also add some details or make the report into more deep details for you. Let's try, for example, get the store under the seller ID. Now we have each seller ID has the store that he sold in before and the total amount he sold, and now we have this subtotal for each seller ID and this grand total. For sure we can reverse that and get the store above the seller ID to have a different view for us. Also, you can clear the filter or add new filter or add new items, remove items or anything you need to get a better view according to your needs for your report. That's not only you can do, you can also make some change in the pivot table format from the pivot table analyze and the design menu. If we clicked on the design menu, we will see here an option for the subtotal and grand total and report layout. If we clicked on the report layout, you can change your pivot table into show in tabular form, and that will give you a better view and get the header for each one of your column in the pivot table. Also, you can repeat each store to get a full detail view. If you clicked on report layout and then you pressed on repeat all items label, now you will have everything the same structure as the normal table. We can undo that to get more clear view. And then you can also show or hide the grand total from this icon. If we clicked on the grand total, you can determine if you would like to get the grand total off for rows and column, or turn it on for rows and column, only for rows and only for column. If we click on turn it off at all, then we will have everything hidden now. The same here for the subtotal. We can choose whether we don't need to show subtotals or show all subtotals at the bottom group or at the top. Now it's created or it's added as at the bottom of the group. Now if we try to click don't show subtotals, now we will have only the data we need. But for sure subtotals are so important if you would like to create a report and summarize your data. Also, if you don't want to add sum of to the total amount or to the header in the values field, you can easily rename it as you need, but if you will add it as the same headers that already included in the dataset you are using, for example, this is named as a total amount. If we try to rename it as total amount here and press OK, we will have an error here because this field name is already exist. You can get rid of that by adding space before or after the name, or rename it as a new name. For example, let's try amount only. Now everything's sorted. Now let's try another thing. If we remove the seller ID here, now we have this store places and the amount sold from each store and each location. But if we need to check the percentage of each store location as of from total, we can add the total amount again here under the values. Let's change this to be sales ratio. And then we can go here and right click, show values as, and we can check it as a percentage from the grand total. Yes, I know that we already removed it or hide it, but it still can be calculated using this way. You also have too much options in this area. You can get the ratio of the column total from the row total, or of specific column that already in your dataset, or from ratio of parent row total, and etc. Let's try to create another pivot table and get some details and some insights from our data. Let's select our data and press insert, then pivot table, and now we will add like existing worksheet. We have already existing worksheet. Then we will select the location here in this cell and press OK. Now we can create our pivot table from scratch. Let's try to add our category in the rows, also the store location for each one, and for sure we can add the total amount here. Now as you can see, it's a vertical table, but fortunately the pivot table has the option to change the view immediately. So we can get the store location here in the column side, and now we have this informative table. Also, using pivot table allow you to filter or sort with multiple ways. For example, if we go for the pivot table analyze menu and then we inserted a new slicer, then you will have a list of your column headers. You need to just select or check the slicer you need or what column you need to filter based on. For example, if we need to filter by the seller ID and the store also, we can check it and press OK. Now we have this slicer. You can determine how many columns you need your slicer here from the slicer menu. So if we select this slicer and change this one column to be like 2 columns or 3 columns, now you have your seller ID into 3 columns. You can resize it. Also, you can resize the store, and then you can change anything from that. This is a control area for your pivot table. You can change what store you need, and you can select multiple store by pressing Control from your keyboard and select multiple store. The same here, if we need to select multiple seller ID, you can press Control and then press the seller ID you need, and then you will have the data you asked for. And if you need to get everything back, all you need to do is to clear the filter. Also, you have another option for the pivot table. You can go for the design and click any format you need, or for sure you can create your own style if you have a specific color palette. Let's try that. Now we have that pivot table formatted by only one click. If you have multiple pivot tables from the same source or from the same data, for example, we have this pivot table and this previous one, they are all reading from the same data set, and you need to link this slicer for these 2 pivot table. All you need to do is to get the pivot table and go for pivot table analyze, click on the filter connections, then select the slicer you need to control this pivot table and press OK. Now, if we click anything from our slicer, it will reflect on all pivot table we have, as we selected that pivot table can be controlled by this slicer. And for dates, we have a specific slicer for it. We can select our pivot table and go for pivot table analyze. We will realize that we have another option here, which is insert a timeline. But at this time, you will have another and different column header. it will only display the column header or the columns that including in it the dates. So we have only the invoice date. We can select it and press OK. Now you will have a timeline slicer that you can use to get the data you need easily and immediately. For example, here we have month. You can create it. You can change it to be a years. So if you have multiple year here, you can find 2025, 2026, or 2024 if the data including different years. And you can move it again to be quarters, and it will change the data into quarters and distribute it into quarters. You can select any quarter you need and it will display the data upon your click. You can change it from quarter to month or from quarter to days or anything you need. You just need to click and drag the period you need to display in the pivot table. We can also go for the timeline and report to connection, then select the other pivot table, and then it will apply any change you need into it. That was our today's video about the pivot table. Pivot table have multiple options and multiple secrets that we will take in the upcoming videos. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the videos, a file that used in this video is linked below in the description. You can download it and try it by yourself. And if you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumb up and subscribe in order not to miss any of our upcoming videos.